We want to be a community that invites people in, and that's flipping the whole model on its head. Anthropic is actually hiring a whole army of philosophers to basically do a moral and accuracy check on some of the output of Claude. What made Steve Jobs so powerful is that he forced the engineers to sit with the designers. If that can all be done much more efficiently and more accurately with a model, with AI, with artificial intelligence, then what am I good for?
Welcome to Against Consensus, a weekly podcast in collaboration with Fin News. I'm your host, Angelo Calvello, and in each 30-minute episode, I interview asset owners, asset managers, service providers, and innovators who are challenging conventional thinking to create better investment outcomes for their beneficiaries and clients. Our goal is to elevate the conversation and help you make smarter investment decisions, always with a little edginess along the way. I'm your host, Angelo Calvello, and today my guest is John Bowman, CEO of the Chartered Alternative Investment Analyst Association, or what we all know as CAIA. I asked John to be on the show because he spent 30 years arguing that the investment profession needs to raise its game by challenging consensus thinking. And as CEO of CAIA, he now has the platform to do something about it. John and his colleagues have spent the past year and a half leading CAIA through Vision 2035, a 10-year strategic roadmap built on 18 months of global listening tours about where the investment profession is headed. In this first part of our conversation, John and I get into why he launched Vision 2035, what it means to run a professional body as a network economy business instead of a transactional one, and the 4 pillars underpinning the transformation. From here, we dig into the report's most provocative topics: system-level thinking, why the industry siloed vertical approach to building talent is a relic of a more stable world, and why geopolitics, climate, and AI now demand investment professionals who can connect the dots across disciplines instead of staying in their lane. We also get into AI directly, where it's already replacing the grunt work of a junior analyst, what that means for how CAIA is rethinking its own curriculum, and why John thinks the future of the industry looks less like an analyst using a model and more like an analyst and a machine learning expert sitting at the same table, iterating in real time. Let's get into it. John, welcome to the show.
Angelo, it's always a pleasure to see you. Our lives have been one of kind of passing ships and intersections along the way, so it's a pleasure to be with an old friend.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We had a cup of coffee together at State Street back in the day, if I remember.
We did, many moons ago, indeed.
Yeah. Well, John, I'm going to give you a few warm-up questions to get you going. First one, what's the meal you would happily eat every week for the rest of your life?
Ooh. I'm going to go with guacamole. I could eat a vat of guacamole all day long.
All right, I'll keep that in mind. Seems like it's a good fat that you're eating. Okay, similar question. What's the song that you know all the words to, but you would prefer nobody hear you sing?
Ooh, well, no song should anyone have to suffer through my singing. I'm going to go with any Journey song. I am a just nut fan of the original Journey, Steve Perry Journey, not the new Journey. But
of course.
Don't Stop Believin'. I guess if I had to choose one, I mean, that's kind of my life anthem.
That's the Sopranos song, man. Are you kidding me? All Italians love that song, so I'm in.
That's right.
All right. So you're now in, well, not now, but you're living in Salt Lake City. And
correct.
I got to ask, are you a skier or are you a hiker?
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is Western Mass, our U.S. headquarters. But typically, as you said, I am at least pretend to live in one place, although I'm 30,000 feet in the air, as you know, most of the time. I would say I'm more of a hiker. Most of my family is a skier, being in the greatest snow on earth, as Utahns like to call themselves, offers up amazing resorts. But I enjoy the summer hikes more.
Okay. And I know you enjoy running, John. Are you running to think or are you running to stop thinking?
That's such a good question. A lot of people ask me, man, you're quite the runner. I said, actually, I'm not. I was never a long distance runner growing up. That wasn't my sport. I was a basketball player. So my knees hurt when I run too long. But to your question, it is a bit of a mental release more than it's a physical fitness activity. And so it is the time where I do my thinking. Often I'm a podcast lover. So not only a contributor and a host, but obviously a huge digester. And there's sparks in every episode that often trigger something that help me think through the work. So it's a release to your question.
Got it. Final one. CFA or CAIA, which shaped your investment thinking more? Because I know you did a term at the CFA.
I did. I'm also a CFA Charterholder. So I am both a member and a former employee, and of course now CEO of CAIA. So that's a partly impossible question, Angelo, to answer. But I'm going to show my bias and just say, given where the industry is going, and given the multiple other ways you can, we'll talk a little bit about AI, for example, multiple other ways conventional investing and basic financial principles can be learned. I would say that CAIA is going to be the more practical solution to today's investment profession.
Okay. And, that kind of takes us into the topic, John. I mean, where the industry is going. I've looked at Vision 2035, and I believe you launched it in 2025. And, my understanding as an outsider, I hold neither CFA or any CAIA credentials. But the stated goal of Vision 2035 was, trying to reshape the industry in terms of long-term value creation. I know you went on a global listening tour. You got a lot of input on this. But what was the catalyst for doing this? You're the CEO there. And do you hold a president title also, by the way?
I do, by bylaw, yes. I rarely use it, but yes.
Okay, but the point is, you're in the chair now. 2035, Vision 2035 was an important document for you. What was the catalyst?
So, Angelo, it's a great question. It started off a bit pedestrian. As any new CEO does or should do, is that they, you get out there and you listen to your stakeholders. What's going well, what's not going well, what would you change if you were me, what should I be prioritizing? And similarly, in parallel, I'm obviously building rapport with my board, the board that is entrusting the future of the industry, or the future of the organization, I should say, to me. And I thought that with an attempt to kind of kill two birds with one stone, we would go through this inclusive strategic planning process where I would be getting outside input from leaders around the world, and then engaging and replaying and regurgitating much of what I've learned in the board discussions, and then determining what we want to be when we grow up, as you might say. Those 8 roundtables you just alluded to, so I did them in 8 financial centers around the world, 15 executives at each table. So you kind of do the math, 120 executives, 20 plus hours of discussion. It was a gold mine, Angelo. And so what I thought was simply just going to be a closed door, inclusive strategic planning process became such an important source of these tectonic shifts and themes that those executives thought were coming down the road that CAIA could respond to, that we decided, we felt obligated almost to launch that as a report. So to your question, the strategic planning process, I would say, why did we launch Vision 2035? Well, again, brand new to the seat. How should I think about putting my mark and responding to the massive change that we'll discuss today? Was part of establishing a 10-year plan. It seems sensible. And I think the biggest insight that maybe you can riff off of and take this in any direction is that the underpinning foundation of Vision 2035 was that we, CAIA, as a professional body, that we are what's sometimes called a network economy business. And what I mean by that is that the more people that take part in the service or the product, the more valuable the product becomes over time, right? A social media platform would argue this, an email platform would argue this. The reason that is so radical is that none of us as a professional bodies operate that way. We behave like we are selling educational widgets. Angelo, come take our exam. And by the way, we'll throw this free micro-credential in, or come take this self-paced online course. And we're selling you things like it's transactional. We want to be a community that invites people in, that provides captivating experiences and peer-to-peer networking and practical value, that also you can partake in education of various avenues along the way. And that's flipping the whole model on its head. And so Vision 2035 is meant to answer, how do we transform this from a business that sells educational product to a community that everyone wants to be a part of? And that is the big transformative shift that I'm trying to lead the board and the larger membership through.
And that's one of I guess I'll say, the 4 touch points, the primacy of community.
That's right.
And then I think related to that is the activating of the network advantage. Does that tie in there, John?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it is one of the 4, but it flows through each of the 4 as well. It could be, if you want to do the visual kind of house with the 4 pillars, right? The kind of the foundation would be this idea of network economy. And then there's these activities that you've just alluded to, that you've got to build something really differentiated. You got to counter position your community. How many emails and invites and events and social engagements are you invited to, right? So we've got to differentiate and offer something that's really unique. And we've also got to provide outstanding content. We're going to talk a little bit about TPA and systems thinking. We're always trying to be on the edge of what investors are thinking about. And then we need to engage, the last pillar, if you will, is that we need to engage with the enterprise too. So it's one thing, back to our State Street days, for example, Angelo and John could be perhaps arrested by the idea of earning their CFA because it helps them in their career. But we also need to engage with State Street as an enterprise and ensure that we're providing solutions and reason for them to support Angelo and John on this journey. And there's multiple ways that we're thinking about more of a B2B proposition for an organization that historically has been just about B2C sales.
It's interesting. You're thinking prospectively. I was going to ask you, you're a year and a half approximately into this Vision 2035. What lessons have you learned? And would there be any changes you'd make in hindsight? Or are those 4 pillars still the ones that are structurally sound?
The pillars haven't changed, so I'm as convicted as ever on the pillars. It is very hard work to transform an organization. So I like to kind of liken CAIA to, our late teenagers. We both have older children now, Angelo, and we're 24 years old as an organization, but still going through kind of adolescence and building out a programmatic kind of professional foundation of an organization that has good systems underpinning, that has a great organizational spine, that has strong HR and professional development capabilities. So part of it is just this coming of age story. We had bootstrapped and kind of scrapped our way into a fairly large scale now, 15,000 members around the world. So we're legitimate. But we need to kind of ensure that the apparatus and you might say the trellis of this growth is sturdy. And we had to backtrack a little bit to make sure that we could scale based upon that foundation. The other thing I'd say is, look, everything I've just already alluded to, building a B2B capability and culture and rhythms is really hard work. Selling to a head of L&D or a CEO or the head of the private equity practice is a much harder, longer sales cycle, more complicated, more ROI-based discussion than trying to convince Angelo to take the CAIA program. It's just a completely different world, and we're learning along the way that that transformation takes longer than we hoped, and it needs different types of competencies associated with it.
Okay, that's a good lesson learned. I appreciate that. And inside Vision 2035, you had these 8 key insights. I'm not going to ask you to list them. We'll put a link to the document, so if people want to dig deep, they can dig deep. But what you and I had talked about, as we prepared for this, was one of the insights, or signals, perhaps I think is what you call them, is this idea of systems level thinking. What does systems level thinking mean in practice for CAIA and its members?
I think this whole concept is new to the investment world. The industry you and I grew up with and frankly, that's still endorsed today, is a very siloed, what I call vertical professional development approach. And so you get hired as, let's just say, a junior equity associate, and then you move into a senior equity analyst. And then if you're really good at that, you move into a junior portfolio manager, senior portfolio manager, et cetera. On the private capital side, you usually stay, same type of thing, you stay within your asset class, you stay in your native environment. So there's not a lot of lateral movement traditionally. When you're recruiting, as you might remember, Angelo, what most of these private capital firms do is they go to the top tier business schools, or they fish, figuratively speaking, in the 2-year investment banking programs at the big investment banks. What we're arguing is that that whole approach to building talent, developing human capital, is a model of the past. And the reason we say that is that the world is now much more interconnected and uncertain. So let's just talk about the regime we operate in, right? For 40 years, we've had low interest rates, falling to low interest rates. We've had lack of inflation. We've had, in the history of the world, from a precedent standpoint, a fairly conflict-free 4 decades, relatively speaking. You've had a global order that was put in post-World War II that created an assumption of globalization and trade openness and kind of laissez-faire regulation around the world that started in the early 80s. All of this has created the water that we swim in, that investment professionals have built their whole orthodoxy off of. And we believe, and this was validated in a lot of those sessions that we alluded to at the beginning of the discussion, that we are now shifting into a new super cycle that's a return to the past, where you've got uncertainty, you've got higher structural interest rates, you've got volatile inflation based upon some of the pressures on pricing around the world, and you've got a geopolitical situation that is unpredictable. And as a result, you got to connect a lot more dots as let's just take a real estate associate, for example. You know, what does this piece of property, what is it worth if there's climate pressure, if there's a significant change in the way we think about this part of the world? What does it mean if there's a trade block or supply chain disruption for this particular portfolio company? And you can't outsource that to what we've done in the past is, the retired general that comes in and gives the quarterly geopolitical overview, or the climate team that sits across the street that provides an ESG overlay, right? This has to be ingrained and embedded, these multiple touch points, this systems level thinking in the future investment professional. And I think it's a massive change that I don't think the industry has really accepted yet. And we're arguing from the very beginning of recruiting, meaning where you're looking for these individuals, to how you slot them in, to team structure, to culture, to org chart, all of that has to change to be successful in this new investing environment.
John, it sounds like you're talking about a cross-disciplinary team that sits at the table, and recruiting that team requires you to look beyond the typical, kind of resources. I agree with you. We haven't done this well in this industry. It tends to be, heavily credentialed, no disrespect. It tends to be MBA type focused. They're not looking for philosophers. It's been my whole career fighting that fight. I know you're a liberal arts guy too.
I am.
So
I am. Yeah. It's finally our time is what I'm hoping.
I hope so. I mean, I've been still pushing the philosophy thing in the AI space, but yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, it's cross-disciplinary, and it starts with HR, not necessarily with that entity, but where are we going to look for this type of talent, right? And you're saying it hasn't happened much yet. You're still not seeing this because of the inculcation of tradition?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think around the edges, to be fair. I mean, you just mentioned philosophers, and I know you follow AI closely. Anthropic is actually hiring a whole army of philosophers to basically do a moral and accuracy check on some of the output of Claude. And so, using that as an example, we have technically brilliant and capable individuals throughout this industry, as strong as any industry in the world. But we don't have a lot of folks, to your point, that think laterally, that connect dots. They've not been trained. This is not their fault, but they've not been trained nor conditioned, and the markets haven't required them to think across these disciplines and bring it together into an investment thesis that is going to endure through some of this uncertainty. You might remember, again, just dating us a little bit, the kind of the paper that in '86, I believe it was, that has defined a whole generation of investment professionals was the old Brinson paper that suggested, and most people know the headline if they don't know the source, that something like 90% of investment returns comes through asset allocation or investment return variability, however you want to interpret it. What we're arguing is that actually the next 40 years, it could be geopolitics that is that top taxonomy feature, meaning what parts of the world are you exposed to? What new risk premia based upon supply chain, trade blocks, geopolitical skirmishes will determine your portfolio outcome? We think that might have graduated to be the new Brinson asset allocation for the next 40 years. And to have investment professionals that think that way, you need to populate, to your point, your organization with very different individuals with different skill sets around that table.
What is CAIA doing to support systems level thinking?
Well, you alluded to our brand new paper. So out of the, just backing up, out of that Vision 2035 journey and trip that I took around the world that led to the 8 roundtables, systems level thinking was overwhelmingly a discussion that was on the hearts and the minds. And I think haunting is a fair word for most of the CEOs around the table. So it was such a profound takeaway from our initial roundtables that we said, this deserves some oxygen by itself. So we have followed up with this derivative piece from that original paper called Systems Level Thinking that we just dropped a couple weeks ago. And we wrote that in partnership with our friends over in the UK, the Thinking Ahead Institute. They're kind of a third-party research arm of WTW, the consultant. Yeah. And this is meant to answer, first of all, to your question, what is systems level thinking? How do you know it when you see it? And what are the practical ways, what are the steps that organizations can start taking to embed this recruiting and professional development capability within their investment organizations? So that's the first step, is this seminal piece, Angelo. But then we're going to be devoting a lot of events and discussions, webinars, future content, podcasts, just like this, around speaking about this issue.
I have a couple thoughts, John. I'm not sure I want to go there, but make sure you include philosophers in those symposia.
Indeed.
And this whole issue of Anthropic and others hiring philosophers. I do an AI salon every quarter with Melissa Lopez here in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And we brought in, at the last one, I think we had 4 philosophers. All of them were fluent in some way, at least in the dialect of AI, because you have to understand, in our case, it's an AI salon. So make sure you follow through and you get your philosophers, your anthropologists, your meteorologists in there. So
there you go.
And then, you've already, you've kind of mentioned AI at a high level. I know AI is kind of a natural extension of this systems level thinking discussion, where you talked about a general. I would say you need to have a machine learning engineer at the table. You need to have them not across the street. You need to have them right there from the very beginning. I learned that these men and women think about an investment problem differently than you and I might think about it, and our peers might, because they haven't been inculcated in the curricula of the industry. So thinking about AI, where does AI fit into CAIA's view of where the industry is headed?
So there's an internal and an external conversation, dialogue, and kind of anxiety, if I'm honest, that we're discussing at the leadership team table, at the board level table. So let me talk about the industry first, the outward facing. And look, when I first entered the industry, again, thinking back to when around the time we would have had coffee back in the 90s when I was at State Street, I was a junior analyst. I already alluded to what a junior analyst does, right? So they're building models. They're attempting to forecast cash flows and performance of an individual company. And I was long only equity, just to put that in perspective, and try to understand whether they're undervalued or overvalued at current prices, right? This is not rocket science, but it took a lot of Excel time, a lot of calculation time, a lot of forecasting time. And I used to do the old meme that I'm sure all of your listeners have heard, right? This was real. I followed retail and tech hardware, which I know is a strange combination. But every Tuesday, it really happened. We would go sit or go look at, the Walmart parking lot. Same time, same day and you try to extrapolate, the number of cars in the parking lot. Well, guess what? And you know this, Angelo. You can now not only get that through geo data, the pictures of the parking lot at a certain time, but of much more importance than extrapolating what cars mean to sales, you can get credit card data in unstructured form and then plug it into a model, and it tells you exactly how to interpret or get a sense for time series and trajectory of where sales in Walmart for that quarter are going. So then if that can all be done much more efficiently and more accurately with a model, with AI, with artificial intelligence, then what am I good for? Right? And this does lead to systems thinking a little bit, is that my role then as the human analyst is interpreting that data, putting it through my lateral filter of being human and making judgment and agile assumptions based upon other things that are going on. What is impacting, this time series that suggests, at least the model suggests, that we're going to get a number that beats earnings? Are there other elements? The model just knows what it knows. So I need to have context and sense making of the world and other factors that could have connective tissue. And great analysts are going to be just this. So when I think about AI, it's a peaceful coexistence only if the org chart and the new analysts adjust to what makes humans and spend most of their time on interpretation and trajectory versus this busy work that, frankly, a model's going to do so much better.
The thing that catches my attention is, yes, augmentation. We're going to use AI to help us make better decisions. But what's CAIA doing about that? How are you encouraging that type of behavior? I know we've got a systems level thinking paper and stuff, but now I'm talking specifically about AI, because AI is different than thinking about geopolitics or structurally high inflation. I mean, this is a different type of thinking. It's artificial intelligence. So how are you supporting that type of behavior, systems level thinking in the organizations?
Yeah. And by the way, just to kind of close that loop, the reason AI is connected to geopolitics and climate and instability and supply chain shifting is that is what human analysts can do to augment what the model is saying, because the model exists in the vacuum of the data you've provided it or the data it's crawled, right? So in order to be valuable as a supplement to the model, you need to adapt to bring value to your portion of the process. That's all I was saying. Now, that your question, though, is a segue. As I said, that's the external. How are we at CAIA reacting to that as well? Well, let's start with the CAIA program. This is the namesake of our organization. It is the professional designation that really is the headiest and the capstone course for who we are. We've named our organization after it. We're talking through, for lack of a better phrase, kind of an AI proofing approach to and doing a significant deep audit of the curriculum right now. So I just want to be provocative for a minute, Angelo. Does that future analyst we just kind of riffed on, do they need to know the Sharpe ratio? Do they need to know the Gordon growth model? Do they need to be able to calculate return on invested capital? Now, we could have an argument about whether you need to know it so you can challenge the model or interpret whether the model is correct. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that fundamentally, if the model's going to be doing a lot of these things we just identified that humans like me used to do back in the 90s, should that be taught in the curriculum, or should our curriculum be about equipping the human to sit alongside of the model? And there's a long journey for us to I think rewire that curriculum in a way that prepares them for that future augmentation role versus the role that again that has been enduring the last several decades for the analyst.
But if you think about just Sharpe ratio for a minute, right?
Yeah.
Do they need to know? I think are you asking, do they need to know how to calculate it, or do they need to understand its value in decision making?
I'm challenging the former. Clearly, they need to know when they see a Sharpe ratio that's below or above 1, what does that mean, right? So they need to be able to interpret and then apply, but they need to calculate. And I'm just looking in the mirror here, Angelo, to your question, saying much of our professional body work and curriculum, particularly in the early levels of these designations, are about calculation and doing and the grunt work. And I'm just asking the question is, does the future analyst really need to know that? I'm not know that I'm convicted on where that line is, but it's probably not where we've built the curriculum historically any longer.
Does the future analyst need to understand machine learning?
I think yes, in the case that if we expect the daily lives to play out somewhere near what I described a moment ago, it needs to understand enough to know how to properly prompt, enough to know the potential shortcomings of the output, meaning you need to know what inputs the model's using so that you can interpret the output and where maybe the Achilles heels are in its recommendation. And so you need to know enough to be able to challenge and maybe pick out, have the red flag figuratively come out when you see a piece of data that doesn't quite pass the gut test based upon knowing what the Sharpe ratio is, just to kind of mix metaphors here. If you know what the Sharpe ratio is meant to be telling you, then when you see an output that is not consistent with that, at least following up and asking the questions. And I think that dialogue, I know that's an odd thing to say about an AI model dialoguing with a human, but that's exactly what needs to happen going forward. And the analyst needs to know enough to be able to have that conversation.
And John, I'm going to push you a little bit. We talked earlier about when firms are looking to hire staff, they need to think more broadly. Right? I mean, it's not just going to the Ivies or going to the investment banking firms in your example. If I buy that, then I can see asset owners, asset managers, consultants also looking to the Carnegie Mellons of the world, to the NYU, machine learning labs of the world. Let's assume they're able to attract and retain those people, so they're now at the table. Are those, I'm going to call them professionals, because they're typically already have some kind of accreditation with a master's or a PhD in, I'll just say broadly, computer science. Are those future CAIA members, or are they just now men and women at the table with CAIA members?
I think probably the latter. I don't know that a computer scientist, machine learning expert, your professional prompter needs necessarily know to the depth of an investment professional what is taught in CAIA. But I think you're onto something, is that no longer can this be the IT or the AI department that is given tasks without context, spits it out, sends it across the street, as we were describing earlier, and then is not involved in the interpretation and the reprompting and the clarification. I think these individuals need to be sitting on the investment team. They need to be hearing the context of why a particular research project or prompt is relevant. And then once that comes back in real time, the analyst is sitting, or the portfolio manager is sitting with the prompter and say, actually, that doesn't look right. Well, can you clarify that? Or can you slightly alter the prompt there? Or can you ask for a slightly different output? This needs to be happening in real time if we're going to get the full lateral benefit of these multidisciplinary minds and competency set. And that it's just like, this is perhaps a bad analogy, Angelo, but what made Steve Jobs so powerful is that he forced the engineers to sit with the designers. These are people that don't hang out on the weekends. They right brain, left brain, intense, artsy, right? And it wasn't designing the next great phone and throwing it over the wall to the engineers and saying, build it. They were actually iterating in real time. The chip won't fit in there. The circuit board is too big for that. You've got to change the screen a little bit. Well, that looks ugly. And it's this constant give and take. And I think in an odd way, it's a great model for how we should think about prompters and AI experts, machine learners, and the analyst.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to move beyond prompt engineering, because if you're going to hire that kind of talent, that talent's going to come in and they're going to build models. They're not going to use an LLM only. That junior analyst will use the LLM. But ideally, you bring this talent in so they could help create a model that's going to deliver better outcomes for clients.
That's right.
So, when I was at, Rosetta, we had a team of engineers that did not speak investing. And then you had Julia and me on the other side. We didn't speak machine learning, but it was like two dialects from the same language. And we were able to kind of put that together. So we had their orthogonal perspective on this problem. And they came up with some wacky ass solutions because they didn't understand liquidity, transaction costs, hard to borrow. But so you got to think beyond just prompt engineering. It's really, you bring these men and women in to sit at the table to say, okay, I've got another way to think about this optimization problem. So,
and here's where it really gets real, Angelo, is that around that future investment team table, you described the philosopher. I'd throw in like a historian in there, geopolitical analyst, climate analyst, machine learning expert, and then investment professional. You've got to compensate and incentivize all of them in a way that attracts that and retains that type of talent. It can no longer be the two-class approach where you've got the superstar private equity partner and then all the supporting cast. If we really believe that systems thinking and multidisciplinary inputs are going to create better outcomes, just to use your language, better outcomes for clients, which is the whole reason we're here, let's not forget, then all of those moving parts and all of those inputs need to be, I don't know about equally, but fairly compensated. And that's not been the case historically. So it's also in the very way we think about incentivizing talent as well.
We'll leave things here for now. John and I are just getting started. And in part 2, we dig into the total portfolio approach, why CAIA is putting real resources behind it, and who's resisting the shift away from strategic asset allocation to TPA. John doesn't pull any punches on what the resistance reveals about compensation structures, team culture, and how the deep baked silos that asset owners have are an impediment. And we close out with a conversation about tokenization, where John sees it solving real liquidity problems for illiquid assets, why the industry may be having the wrong conversation about wealth management access, and what it'll take for this technology to finally reach up to the promise CAIA was writing about back in 2019. Thanks for listening. And be sure to subscribe to the show on the podcast app of your choice and follow us on the Against Consensus YouTube channel. You can also find episodes at the Against Consensus website, and the show's episodes will be on FinNews' website. Also, it'd be great if you could follow us on LinkedIn. All the links are in the show notes. If you have someone who belongs in this conversation, an asset owner, an asset manager, a service provider, send them my way. If you represent an organization that wants to reach the most sophisticated audience in institutional investing, then let's talk about a sponsorship. And if you're an emerging manager with a genuinely differentiated investment approach, let's talk about creating a custom episode for you that can help you build your brand. And in case you're wondering, our music is provided by the Super Trio, courtesy of the Northrop family. No AI-generated music for us. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time. Namaste. All opinions expressed by hosts and guests are solely their own. The information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The host, guests, and their affiliated organizations are not providing investment, legal, tax, or financial advice. Investment strategies discussed may not be suitable for all investors, as individual circumstances may vary.